Okay, so you know how we're always talking about being efficient? Like squeezing the most out every minute of the workday, especially as young working professionals?
Yeah, constantly on the go. Gotta get things done
Totally. And it makes you think about how you get around too, like your commute and everything.
for sure.
Well, what if I told you that sometimes more public transportation could actually be causing more traffic?
Really?
Yeah, it sounds kind of crazy, right? Like adding more water to a fire.
It does go against what we normally think, right? More buses, more trains, less cars on the road.
That's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Hmm.
We dug into a bunch of articles and research, especially focused on what's happening in India, since things are changing so fast there.
Yeah, India is a really interesting case study because so many people are moving to cities and the transportation systems are trying to catch up.
Exactly. And what we found is that sometimes that gut feeling that a new metro line or more buses is the answer, well, it's not always that straightforward.
Definitely more complicated than it seems at first glance.
Right. So let's jump into a real world scenario.
Yeah.
Imagine you need to get somewhere that's 7 kilometers away.
Okay. 7 kilometers, so not too far.
Not a huge distance,
Yeah.
right? But we found this story about someone's commute. And even though they used the metro, which is pretty modern and efficient,
Uh,
they still had to use auto rickshaws on both ends of the trip, like to get to the station
yeah.
and then from the station to their final destination.
So even with the metro, it wasn't a seamless journey.
Exactly. And those auto rickshaws are dealing with the same traffic everyone else is. So even though the train part was quick, the whole commute still took a while.
It's like you're not just optimizing for the fastest travel time, you want to minimize the hassle factor too.
The hassle factor. Yeah, I like that.
All those transfers and the uncertainty of waiting and connecting, that can add a lot of friction to the journey.
Totally. And that friction can outweigh any time you save by using public transport.
Makes sense. So the lesson here is that just having public transport isn't enough. It needs to be super smooth and connected for people to ditch their own vehicles.
Right. And this isn't just a theory. Let's talk about Bangalore. They put a ton of money into their metro system.
Oh, yeah, huge investment.
So you'd think traffic would have gotten better.
Right. Logically, yeah.
But here's the thing. Instead of everyone switching to the metro bus ridership, actually went down.
What?
Yeah, and more people started using two-wheelers, motorcycles, and scooters.
So more vehicles on the road instead of fewer.
Exactly. Like a shift in the type of traffic, but not necessarily a reduction.
That's really surprising.
It is. And it shows that building the infrastructure is just one piece of the puzzle.
You also have to consider people's habits, right? Like
Right.
they're used to driving their own car.
Totally.
Yeah.
Those habits are hard to break, especially if you've already bought a car or a motorcycle.
And these big public transport projects can take years to finish.
So by the time the metro or the new bus line is finally ready, people have already settled into their routines.
Exactly. They've made the investment in their own vehicles, and they're not going to switch unless public transport is way better.
Way better.
Yeah.
Not just a little bit better.
And I think there's this threshold of tolerance when it comes to traffic.
Threshold of tolerance, what's that?
It's like people complain about traffic, but they only really start looking for alternatives when it gets super bad.
Like, okay, now it's finally so bad that I'll try that crowded bus.
Right. But even then, if that bus doesn't go where you need it to.
Or if it doesn't run when you need it to.
Exactly.
Hey.
The routes and schedules have to work for people's lives.
And in fast-growing cities especially, the public transport might not reach all the new areas.
So if you live on the outskirts or in the suburbs, you might not have much choice but to use your own vehicle.
So we talked about the limitations of public transport itself, but let's switch gears and look at why people love their own cars and bikes.
Okay, that freedom and convenience aspect.
Yeah, that feeling of being able to go anywhere, anytime.
Door-to-door service on your own schedule.
And when you compare it to the hassle of transfers and fixed routes.
Plus sometimes the uncertainty of public transport schedules.
And honestly, in many developing countries, public transport hasn't always been seen as the most reliable option,
Yeah, historically it's been associated with delays and overcrowding.
which makes people even more likely to choose their own vehicle even if they know it's adding to the traffic.
And it's interesting how different parts of the public transport system often operate in silos.
Silos, what do you mean?
Like the metro, the buses, the suburban trains. They're not always well connected.
So you might have to wait forever to transfer between them,
And buy separate tickets for each leg of your journey.
which adds to the cost and the hassle.
It's not very user-friendly.
And it makes that direct route in your own car seem even more appealing.
Totally.
Okay,
Especially when you factor in things like travel time, speed, comfort, and overall convenience.
Private vehicles often win on those points.
They do. And think about those times when your plans change suddenly or you need to make an extra stop.
Like if you have to pick someone up or drop something off,
Public transport can't really handle those spontaneous needs.
you're stuck with a fixed route and schedule.
It's designed to serve the masses, but sometimes it lacks that individual adaptability that we need.
Especially when you're juggling a busy schedule and need to be flexible.
Now let's talk about something that can be a real deal breaker for a lot of people, the discomfort factor.
Yeah, overcrowding is a huge problem in many cities.
Especially in India. We saw this survey that said 37% of commuters avoid public transport because of overcrowding.
That's a lot of people.
It is. And imagine being crammed into a bus or train with barely any space to breathe.
Not a pleasant experience.
No, it's stressful and uncomfortable, and it can even make you feel unsafe.
Versus being in your own car, where you have control over the environment.
You can adjust the temperature, listen to your own music, have your personal space.
It's like a little sanctuary from the chaos.
Exactly. And in recent years, hygiene has become an even bigger concern.
With COVID and everything, yeah, people are more aware of germs.
There was research showing that private vehicles were seen as the safest mode of transport during the pandemic.
Because of the hygiene factor.
Exactly. And even before the pandemic, studies showed that people in India were willing to pay more for a more comfortable bus ride.
So comfort is a big deal.
It is. It's a major factor in people's transportation choices.
Now let's zoom in on a specific challenge that shows why just having public transport isn't enough connectivity.
Ah, that last mile problem.
We saw it highlighted in Odisha, where even if you use the metro,
Which is supposed to be efficient.
you often still need to rely on auto rickshaws or other paratransit options to get to and from the stations.
Adding extra time and cost to your trip.
It's like the missing link in the chain.
And it's not just a minor inconvenience. In Bangalore, a whopping 70% of potential metro users said they were put off by the lack of good last-mile connectivity.
That's a huge barrier to getting people to use public transport.
And governments are starting to recognize this. The Alchem MI scheme in Odisha is a good example. They're trying to create a fully integrated public transport system that connects all the villages.
With a focus on that last mile connection,
Exactly. And in Bhubaneswar, they've introduced e-rickshaws as feeder services for the main bus routes.
trying to make those transfers smoother.
But it's still early days. We need to see how effective these initiatives actually are on the ground.
Because at the end of the day,
It's all about door-to-door convenience.
if public transport can't get you from your starting point to your destination in a reliable and straightforward way,
People will always prefer their own vehicles.
because they offer that door-to-door service.
And the lack of good pedestrian and cycling infrastructure around transport hubs makes things even worse.
You don't want to have to walk a long distance or wait ages for a connecting bus.
Especially if it's not safe or well lit.
Speaking of safety, let's talk about another major obstacle to public transport use,
Safety and security, a huge concern for many commuters.
especially in India, where unfortunately there are real risks.
The average safety score for transit stops across India is only 2.7 out of 5.
That's pretty low.
It is. And it makes people feel vulnerable, which is why they often choose the perceived safety of their own vehicle.
And for women, those concerns are even more serious.
Over half of women in India have experienced sexual harassment on public transport.
And a similar number have said they've missed out on opportunities because they were worried about their commute.
It's a shocking statistic.
It really is.
Yeah.
And in Delhi, it's even worse with a much higher rate of harassment.
And very few incidents being reported.
It's a really worrying situation.
And it's not just harassment. There are broader safety concerns, too.
Like crime on buses and trains, even accidents.
In some areas, even train travel can be risky or unhygienic, leading people to choose more expensive options like flying.
So for many people, the perceived safety of their own car outweighs the downsides of adding to traffic.
It's a tough trade-off, but understandable given the circumstances.
Now let's shift gears again and talk about the lack of integration between different modes of public transport.
This is a big problem because it makes the whole system less efficient and convenient.
It's like each mode is operating in its own little bubble.
Historically, there's been a focus on developing each mode separately rather than thinking about how they all connect.
So you end up with these clunky transfers.
Long walks, confusing signage, unpredictable wait times.
And to add insult to injury,
You often have to buy separate tickets for each mode.
it's like they're not even trying to make it easy for us.
And a big part of the problem is the lack of coordination between the different authorities responsible for transport.
Like the metro might be planned without much thought for how the bus routes will connect to the stations.
Exactly. And even when there are policies aimed at better integration,
They're not always put into practice effectively.
even in Delhi, which has a relatively developed public transport system, integration is still a challenge.
So in the end, this lack of seamless connectivity makes it hard for people to rely on public transport for their entire journey.
Especially when their own vehicle offers a direct route with no transfers.
It's a no-brainer from the user's perspective.
And this brings us to another crucial aspect, the planning and service quality of public transport itself.
It seems like in the past, urban planning in India has often favored private vehicles,
More investment in roads and flyovers than in public transport and pedestrian infrastructure.
which has led to a neglect of bus services and a fragmented approach to mobility,
There's also been this emphasis on big rail projects like metros.
which are important, but sometimes it feels like they come at the expense of improving the bus network.
Buses can offer wider coverage and more flexibility if they're well managed.
But they need supportive policies like dedicated bus lanes.
And the way our cities have sprawled out makes it harder for public transport to be efficient.
So what happens in practice when the planning and policies aren't aligned with user needs?
You get insufficient capacity and infrequent services,
Like in Delhi, where there's a shortage of buses despite the demand.
leading to overcrowding and long wait times.
And if you have to wait 15 minutes or more for a bus,
The appeal of your own vehicle becomes much stronger.
especially if the bus schedule isn't reliable.
And we've seen cases where public transport initiatives haven't really reduced traffic congestion.
Like the Bangalore Metro, which didn't stop the growth of two-wheelers.
Or the Delhi BRTS, which was discontinued because it wasn't working.
Even the Delhi Metro hasn't lived up to its full potential in terms of ridership.
And this isn't unique to India. Even in places like Cairo, attempts to incentivize public transport use haven't been very successful.
Because they haven't addressed the root causes.
Exactly. The core issue is that public transport needs to be planned with the user in mind.
It needs to be frequent, reliable, well-integrated, and convenient.
Otherwise, it won't be a competitive alternative to the perceived benefits of a private vehicle.
And that's why we see this paradox, where more public transport doesn't always lead to less traffic.
It's a complex web of interconnected factors.
So to sum up, we've talked about inconvenience, lack of flexibility, discomfort, poor connectivity, safety concerns, lack of integration, and planning deficiencies.
All of these contribute to the perception that private vehicles are the better option, even though they cause congestion.
It's a challenge, but it's not insurmountable.
Policymakers and urban planners need to take a more holistic and user-centric approach.
It's not just about building more, it's about building smart. So for everyone listening, think about your own city's transport system.
What one small change could make a big difference in your commute and in the overall traffic situation?
Look around, observe your own travel patterns, and you might start to see things in a whole new light.
We can all be part of the solution.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a great discussion.
Until next time,
Keep those wheels turning.
but maybe not all at the same time.
Right. Maybe hop on that bus or train instead.
See you later.